The village was quiet before the first shot. The flag above the chief's lodge caught the cold November wind. An American flag, a white flag beneath it. They had been promised safety. The soldiers came anyway. Colorado Territory, November 29, 1864. What happened on the banks of Sand Creek on that November morning is not a story that fits comfortably into the mythology of the American West. It does not have a villain who can be contained to a single evil man, or a hero whose courage redeems the ending. It is a story about what happens when a government makes promises it does not intend to keep, and sends men with guns to finish the conversation. Sand Creek is a shallow, sandy-bottomed river in southeastern Colorado Territory. In November of 1864, a band of Southern Cheyenne and Arapaho people, perhaps 600 to 700 in total, the majority women, children, and old men, camped in the bend of that river at the explicit direction of the U.S. government. Their chief was Black Kettle. Black Kettle had been trying to make peace for years. He was not a warrior chief in the way the newspapers required. He was a diplomat, a man who understood that his people were being pressed from every direction and that the only path that preserved any part of their world was negotiation. He had met with U.S. officials at Fort Leone. He had been told, explicitly, that his people should camp at Sand Creek and await further instruction. They would be under the protection of the fort. He believed this. He had an American flag flying above his lodge to prove it. Colonel John Chivington had a different understanding. Chivington was a Methodist minister turned military commander who had made his name at the Battle of Glorieta Pass, a genuine military action that had slowed the Confederate advance through New Mexico. He was ambitious, politically connected, and deeply convinced that the only solution to what he called the Indian problem was extermination. He had said exactly that in speeches, publicly, in Denver. By the fall of 1864, the Colorado Territory was in a state of genuine frontier anxiety. Raids and counter-raids, cattle stolen, settlers killed, retaliatory attacks that bred further attacks in a cycle that had been running for years. Chivington believed the moment had come to end it. He assembled roughly 700 soldiers. The 3rd Colorado Cavalry, a 100-day unit called up specifically for this purpose. And he rode south toward Sand Creek. He gave his officers a specific order before they departed. Kill and scalp all, big and little. Nits make lice. The soldiers arrived before dawn on November 29. The village was asleep. Black Kettle heard the horses and came out of his lodge. He saw the soldiers. He raised his American flag. He tied a white flag beneath it. He told his people not to run. They were under protection. The soldiers would see the flags. One of his people, a woman named White Antelope, stood in the creek bed with her arms folded and did not move. Because she had lived 80 years and she understood what she was seeing. And she had decided that if she was going to die she would do it with her arms folded and her face toward the soldiers. They shot her where she stood. What happened next lasted several hours. The soldiers moved through the village with artillery and rifle fire, killing anyone they found. Women tried to dig holes in the creek bank to hide their children. Men tried to fight back with what weapons they had. Some people ran for the hills and were chased on horseback. Black Kettle survived. He fled with his wife, who was shot 9 times and lived. Between 160 and 200 people were killed. The estimates vary and are disputed. The majority were women and children. Soldiers took scalps. They took fingers. Several officers later testified that soldiers had taken more obscene trophies that cannot be described in a family publication. Chivington rode back to Denver. He was welcomed as a hero. The Denver newspapers ran banner headlines. A theater in Denver displayed the scalps and other trophies to cheering crowds. Then the testimonies started coming in. Soldiers who had been at Sand Creek, men who had followed orders and now could not sleep, began talking. Officers who had refused to participate wrote reports. A congressional investigation was opened. The hearings ran through 1865. Testimony was taken. Documents were gathered. The conclusion was blunt. Sand Creek had not been a battle. It was a massacre of people who had been promised protection and were camped exactly where the government had told them to camp. Colonel Chivington had already left the military before the hearings ended. He could not be court-martialed as a civilian. No one was ever prosecuted. Black Kettle survived Sand Creek. He rebuilt his band. He tried again. Another treaty. Another promise of safety. Another government assurance that if his people kept the peace they would be protected. 4 years later, in November of 1868, George Armstrong Custer attacked his village on the Washita River at dawn. The pattern repeated. Black Kettle was killed crossing the river. He and his wife both shot, their bodies ridden over by the cavalry. He had flown an American flag twice. It had not protected him either time. The site of the Sand Creek Massacre is a National Historic Site today. It was designated as such in 2007, after years of advocacy by the Cheyenne and Arapaho tribes. For a long time, the location was contested. People disagreed about exactly where it had happened. The creek had shifted. The landscape had changed. The bones were somewhere under the ground. The families of the people killed at Sand Creek knew where it was. They had always known. They waited while everyone else argued about it. Colonel John Chivington spent the rest of his life defending what he had done. He gave lectures. He wrote articles. He maintained until his death in 1892 that he had fought a battle, not committed a massacre, and that he had done what needed to be done. He never expressed regret. He died in Denver, the city that had once cheered him. He is buried there.